1650, frozen northern plains. Native tribes move sleds across iced rivers. Beside them, you feel wind bite, as travel must cross ice without breaking loads behind. Native tribes shape birch frame sled runners with shallow curvature so the sled itself rides atop crusted snow rather than cutting through it, establishing the base geometry that allows movement to begin without immediate drag buildup. As native tribes pull these sleds into colder air, rawhide lashings contract, tightening the joints of the sled frame, locking runner and crossbar connections so the birch geometry set earlier does not loosen under load. With the sled structure stabilized, native tribes constrain load width so the sled aligns with visible river ice fracture lines, ensuring the sled's footprint does not span weak seams that would fail under distributed weight. To counter lateral forces acting on this narrowed sled, native tribes add stone weights at the runner tips, increasing downward pressure so crosswinds cannot lift or yaw the sled on exposed ice. Before committing this weighted sled to a crossing, native tribes position dogs ahead of the sled, allowing the animal's lighter contact to precede the full runner load and reveal thin ice zones through the sled system itself. Once dogs pass safely, native tribes space human pull lines along the sled rope, distributing downward force across multiple points so the sled's weight enters the ice gradually, rather than as a single stress pulse. This controlled loading exposes pressure ridges ahead, prompting native tribes to shorten sled length so the runner span can pivot between ridges without binding or levering upward. As the sled pivots more tightly, native tribes wrap cargo in hides, preventing ice spray from bonding loads directly to the sled deck and locking mass where adjustment is needed. With cargo secured, native tribes shift to snowshoes, whose lattice geometry widens foot contact so members can move beside the sled without punching through drifted snow adjacent to the track. Ashwood snowshoe frames carried by native tribes flex under body weight, allowing this widened contact to persist without snapping as the sled path crosses uneven snow surfaces. Rawhide webbing within these snowshoes is spaced to shed snow, preventing buildup that would alter foot height relative to the sled runners and disrupt pull alignment. As snowshoes maintain consistent height, native tribes adjust footfall cadence so impacts do not synchronize with sled runner vibrations that could propagate cracking through ice beneath. Approaching riverbanks, native tribes select shallow entry angles, guiding sled runners onto ice without catching edges that would halt forward motion and torque the frame. When refrozen leads interrupt the crossing, native tribes unload the sled in sequence, removing mass so runners can traverse brittle sections without exceeding ice tolerance. Removed cargo is temporarily stacked on shore by native tribes, reducing cumulative ice stress while preserving sled orientation toward the intended exit line. Once across, native tribes reuse wind-scoured ice trails, allowing sled runners to encounter hardened surfaces that reduce drag compared to untouched snow margins. To further reduce resistance, native tribes polish runner bottoms with animal fat, limiting ice adhesion that would otherwise increase pull force and slow progression. This smoother glide allows the sled nose curvature, shaped earlier, to lift cleanly over sastrugi ridges without digging in and arresting motion. As the sled crests these ridges, native tribes limit pack height so the center of mass stays below runner tops, preventing rollover during lateral shifts. Rope length is then calibrated by native tribes, keeping pullers positioned away from thin ice zones identified earlier by dogs and probing. When river channels rise toward banks, native tribes rely on snowshoe heel rise to climb out smoothly while maintaining consistent sled pull angles. On descents beyond the bank, native tribes angle sled runners sideways, using friction against the ice surface as a braking mechanism embedded in runner geometry. Camp relocation by native tribes is timed to daylight, when ice transparency allows the sled path ahead to be visually assessed before movement resumes. During travel, ice-probing poles are carried within arm reach by native tribes, integrated into the sled operation, so thickness can be checked without stopping pulls. If runners sink into slush pockets, native tribes redistribute load on the sled deck, shifting mass rearward to lift runner tips free. These adjustments stress lashings, prompting native tribes to repair sled joints using spare hide strips during brief travel halts. With sled motion restored, native tribes rely on snowshoe toe upturns to prevent members' feet from diving into powder alongside the sled track. At major crossings, native tribes sequence sled movement, sending lighter sleds first, so ice response is observed before heavier loads follow. If runner wood thins from abrasion, native tribes replace damaged sections with driftwood, reshaping runners to match original sled geometry. In whiteout conditions, native tribes widen puller spacing so sleds do not collide when visual references disappear. At night, native tribes invert sleds, lifting runners off the ice to prevent freeze-in that would lock the sled to the surface. Before morning travel, native tribes inspect ice conditions anew, ensuring the sled system engages only surfaces that match its load configuration. As moisture freezes overnight, native tribes find snowshoe webbing tightened, restoring lattice tension so members can resume controlled movement beside the sled without recalibration. Native tribes align sled tracks to follow existing fissure patterns already visible in the ice, positioning the sled runners within lines that have proven stable rather than forcing new stress paths across the frozen surface. With the sled now committed to these fissures, native tribes reshape cargo bundles into low, elongated forms so the sled presents minimal surface area to wind sweeping across open ice. During crossings, native tribes pause movement entirely, standing beside the sled to listen for sub-ice movement, using sound transmitted through the runner contact points to judge whether the fissure path remains intact. When scoring marks appear, native tribes round runner edges, reducing sharp contact that would carve into ice and increase drag along the fissure-guided track. As cold intensifies, native tribes adjust snowshoe strap placement so numb toes do not twist inside bindings, preserving controlled foot placement relative to the sled's pull line. Approaching pressure hummocks, native tribes lower sled loads by hand, reducing the vertical drop so runner tips do not strike and lever the sled upward. If new cracks open mid-descent, native tribes rotate the sled laterally, allowing runners to cross narrow openings without aligning lengthwise over weak seams. On glare ice sections where snowshoes slip, native tribes remove snowshoes entirely, placing boots directly on ice to regain traction needed to control the sled. As rope fibers stiffen in deep cold, native tribes retie knots, restoring flexibility so pull points respond evenly when tension returns. During warming afternoons, native tribes increase spacing between sleds, preventing cumulative heat-softened ice from bearing multiple loads at once. After slush travel, native tribes dry sled runners near fire, lifting them clear so moisture evaporates and rot does not weaken the wood structure. Resuming travel along rivers, native tribes reshape cargo bundles so the sled clears low willow banks without snagging or twisting the runner frame. Midday stops allow native tribes to repair snowshoes with bone awls, restoring webbing tension so members can continue moving beside the sled at matching height. When temperatures drop again, native tribes shift sled travel to night, when refreezing stiffens ice and restores load-bearing capacity beneath the runners. This firmer surface reveals runner camber changes, prompting native tribes to retighten lashings and restore the sled's original curvature. Near journey's end, native tribes select final river exits where snow bridges thicken ice, guiding the sled onto reinforced zones rather than bare edges. Upon reaching winter camp, native tribes break down sleds and snowshoes, separating runners, frames, and bindings to prevent freeze-locked damage. Snowshoe frames are stacked vertically by native tribes during rest, preventing warping that would alter foot geometry for the next movement cycle. Repeated glare ice slips lead native tribes to cut deeper grooves into runners, increasing directional stability along hardened surfaces. As hides stiffen and loosen bindings unevenly, native tribes rewrap cargo, restoring tight contact between load and sled deck. To prevent nosedive in uneven snow, native tribes shift sled pull points forward, altering force vectors applied to the runners. Swollen feet require adjustment, so native tribes rethread snowshoe bindings, maintaining secure contact without cutting circulation. After slush crossings, native tribes scrape runner undersides clean, removing refrozen buildup that would increase drag on the next ice sheet. When ice seams appear uncertain, native tribes divide loads between twin sleds, reducing individual runners' stress during the crossing. To maintain coordination, native tribes shorten snowshoe stride so foot movement matches the sled's glide speed. If side drift misaligns the sled, native tribes use a pivot technique, rotating the runner base without lifting the full load. Rope coils are carried inside hides by native tribes, keeping fibers warm enough to remain flexible when deployed. At stops, native tribes reheat runner joints, retightening shrinking lashings to restore structural rigidity. Repeated crust strikes force native tribes to correct snowshoe toe angles, preventing foot tips from diving beside the sled track. When wind fills fissures with snow, native tribes abandon old sled tracks, avoiding hidden weaknesses beneath drifted surfaces. Before entering tree-lined bends, native tribes lower cargo height so the sled clears branches without torquing the runners. Ice chipping damage leads native tribes to reshape runner-leading edges, smoothing impact points to restore glide. Finally, native tribes stagger snowshoe placement among members, preventing synchronized footfalls from transmitting unified stress into the ice beneath the sled. As the sled climbs and inclines, native tribes double sled lashings, reinforcing joints so shifting loads do not twist runner geometry under uneven uphill tension. When fatigue alters footing, native tribes swap puller positions along the sled ropes, maintaining consistent force application. So missteps do not yaw the sled offline. Before re-entering river ice, native tribes test snowshoe frames on bank snow, confirming frame stiffness, and web tension will support stable movement beside the sled. On steep river descents, native tribes intentionally increase runner drag, pressing runners flatter, so friction slows the sled and prevents uncontrolled acceleration. To stop cargo from locking together, native tribes adjust spacing between bundles, preventing freeze weld that returns separate loads into a rigid mass. At narrow sled crossings, native tribes remove snowshoes, placing feet directly on ice so tactile balance guides precise runner placement. Once moving again, native tribes check runner alignment against earlier track curvature, ensuring the sled continues to follow proven stress paths. Overnight cold hardens rawhide, so native tribes retie rope knots at morning, restoring knot geometry needed for even load transfer. When exposed rock bands interrupt snow cover, native tribes lift sled, runners clear, carrying the sled to protect runner edges from impact damage. Persistent ice buildup prompts native tribes to trim snowshoe webbing, removing sections that trap ice and alter foot height beside the sled. If cracks appear in runners, native tribes change load angle on the sled deck, shifting weight away from damaged sections to preserve glide. During pauses, native tribes place resting blocks beneath sled runners, lifting them off ice so they do not freeze in under stationary load. As afternoon drifts soften ice margins, native tribes widen snowshoe stride, maintaining lateral stability while matching the sled's slower glide. After abrasive crossings, native tribes reapply fat to runner bottoms, restoring smooth contact where ice crystals have roughened the surface. Cargo bundles are rotated by native tribes, equalizing freeze exposure so no single side stiffens and alters sled balance. When circulation falters, native tribes loosen snowshoe heel bindings, restoring foot control necessary to guide the sled safely. Near audible ice pops, native tribes slow sled pull cadence, spacing force pulses so runner contact does not trigger crack propagation. At stops, native tribes inspect runner seams for daylight, identifying splits that could widen under renewed load. Snowshoe frames are dried away from direct flame by native tribes, preventing brittle wood that would fail while moving alongside the sled. Ice shells forming on cargo are chipped away with bone tools, reducing dead weight that would stress sled runners. If narrow cracks block progress, native tribes reposition the sled diagonally, allowing runners to bridge gaps without aligning fully over weak ice. On refrozen crust layers, native tribes exaggerate snowshoe toe lift, keeping feet from catching and pulling the sled off track. Runner edges are re-smoothed by native tribes, preventing snagging on snow bridges that span minor fissures. As runner camber weakens, native tribes redistribute cargo, restoring even curvature so both runners share load equally. Warped snowshoe frames are pressed flat by native tribes, resetting geometry needed for stable movement beside the sled. With rising temperatures, native tribes recalculate sled spacing, increasing distance so warming ice bears only one load at a time. Runner lashings are shielded from meltwater by native tribes, preventing softening that would loosen joints mid-travel. Before committing to slope exits, native tribes test snowshoe traction, confirming footing can control sled direction during ascent. Load tension is reduced by native tribes when runners bow, preventing permanent deformation of the sled frame. At pressure ridges, native tribes manually raise the sled nose, guiding runners over obstacles without blunt impact. After ice crystal abrasion, native tribes reknot snowshoe webbing, restoring lattice strength for continued travel beside the sled. Runner tracks are followed by native tribes until ice tone changes, signaling altered thickness beneath the sled. At crossings, native tribes unload cargo sequentially, minimizing stationary stress while runners rest on the ice. As the winter route ends, native tribes lift sled runners clear, releasing the structure from ice contact before long-term camp storage. Under winter travel, the sled used by native tribes resolves into a continuous mechanical argument with ice. Birch runners, shortened spans, retightened lashings, and narrowed loads are not separate solutions but linked responses to how force moves through frozen surfaces. Each modification changes how weight enters a fissure, how drag accumulates on glare ice, or how vibration travels along a runner edge. Snowshoes extend this system laterally, allowing members to apply force without concentrating stress beneath the sled. Dogs, ropes, spacing, and cadence act as measuring devices, registering thickness, sound, and resistance before failure occurs. Across repeated crossings, the sled becomes increasingly tuned. Runner camber is corrected after abrasion. Load height is lowered when wind increases torque. Pull points shift forward as snow depth changes. Cargo is reshaped, rotated, unloaded, and reloaded, not for efficiency, but to keep geometry within limits the ice will accept. Repairs occur where the surface allows stopping. Movement resumes only when joints, bindings, and tracks align again with visible conditions. Within this system, travel is not directional alone. It is iterative. Each river crossing redefines the next. Each pressure ridge alters runner length and descent control. Night travel follows refreezing, not preference. Daylight pauses follow visibility, not fatigue. The sled advances only as far as its structure can be adjusted to remain intact. Seen as a broader pattern, this travel method shows how human movement persists, where surfaces cannot be altered. The terrain is not reshaped. Instead, tools are reshaped repeatedly to fit it. The record of that process is not left on the land. It remains embedded in runnerwear, knot placement, and snowshoe geometry. Systems assembled, disassembled, and carried forward without sound as winter routes close.